This is Carol Davis, and I have the pleasure today to talk with John Barnes about the history of his work in manual therapy and physical therapy over the decades that he's been practicing. And I've developed some questions that I'd like to ask him from his history and from his therapeutic practice and teaching and present insights that he has now based on his life's work. And John, it's really good to have you here. Thanks a lot for being willing to do this.
You're very welcome, Carol. It's so good to see you again.
Thank you. John, what were you like as a child? What did you inherit from the world of your childhood?
Well, I guess I was a normal kid. My father died when I was three. And I was an only child. I was very fortunate to have an incredible mother. And she taught me a lot. I didn't have brothers or sisters. People would always say, "Don't you want a sister? Don't you want a brother?" I said, "Hell no." That's what goes on in other families. Plus, I don't have to share. It's really great.
Right.
But my mother was a very wise woman. And when she would talk about my father, it was always in such loving, positive terms. And I guess she created an image for me, what it was like to be a man or something like that, I guess, because I could develop my own way of being, and thinking for myself and that type of thing.
Uh-huh.
So I was very comfortable as a kid. When I became a physical therapist, I was shocked at the amount of family turmoil that goes on. So fortunately, my fascia release is one of those things that can always help with that kind of distress also. But so I had a good childhood. I was an athlete and pretty much enjoyed life.
You often talked about going out into the woods when you were little. I remember you telling stories of purposefully getting yourself lost.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, before my father died, he bought a gentleman's farm. And he took my mother and I up there all the time. I really loved it up there. It was high on a mountain. It was surrounded by thousands of acres of woodland. So as an only child, I didn't have anybody to play with. So I drift out into the woods and hike on the trails and messed around the creeks, And a couple of times I got lost. So I just projected my mind above the forest and found my way home. I thought everybody could do that. Turns out they can, but most people just don't realize it, I guess. So I used to make a game out of it, and I purposely get lost at times and trying to find my way home.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked pretty well most of the time. And then it was in August, it was very hot and humid there. So during midday, I would find a big old shade tree, and I kind of nestle down into the roots to get cooled off a bit. I think this was my first lesson in the value of silence, because I noticed that when I would quiet down, all the forest sounds would kick back in. The birds and squirrels would even come to me. And then so I enjoyed it out in nature, still do. My mother occasionally would go shopping, and I had no interest in shopping, but I was kind of bored at times, so I would go shopping with her. And while she was shopping, I drifted around this little town. And one day I stumbled into this old bookstore, and I, for some reason, became enamored in philosophy and the comparative religions. I had a lot of time to read. So as I read these different books from different cultures and different countries, one day it hit me that what's everybody fighting about? They're all saying the same thing. It's just different ways of expressing themselves. As I read through a lot of these different books, they kept talking about an image. They said that we had this luminescent being within us that was truly who we were. That's what today I call our essence. I found that quite interesting. But then as time went on, I guess I kind of forgot about it. And as I got back into therapy, I started to realize over time that a lot of people, their essence had left them. We can come back later as we talk a little bit and come back into more detail about that, because it has a lot to do with our consciousness and healing. We can't heal without true consciousness, but as you know, healthcare has completely ignored consciousness as if it was a bad thing. It's ridiculous.
You call yourself a renegade.
So I said,
You use in the title of your book, the Healing Ancient Wounds, the Renegade's Wisdom.
right.
Talk to us about that.
Well, I feel that everybody has a lot of ancient wounds in them. And myofascial release is basically something that gets the totality of the human being. And it comes from our heart. Certainly we use our intellect, but we don't, in our society, too much come from our heart anymore. In our society, it's pretty much programmed us into human doings instead of human beings. So myofascial release treats the being of the human being. Somehow, myofascial release, whether it's the structural MFR or myofascial unwinding or the rebound that we do, it somehow gets us in touch with these memories from the past. And so as these memories come up, they can be very healing for us. If you go to my website, myofascialrelease.com, there's an article section there. And one of the articles that helps explain this a little bit more is called Without Awareness, There's No Choice. As we go through life, we think we have awareness, but in actuality, we're coming from a lot of everybody else's programming. And the programming that was induced upon us from schooling and religions and parents and bigger people, that kind of thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
What I've seen is very simplistic. What I've seen, well, first of all, as you know, consciousness is just a total taboo in healthcare, traditional healthcare. It can't heal without consciousness. It refutes our moment by moment experience as a human being. Hold on a second. So I have a very simplistic concept that I think is rather practical. Our whole education was based on our intelligence and our rationality. I don't consider our education as true education. I think it was mass hypnosis. So mass hypnosis is basically other people's ideas. There's an old saying, if you don't define yourself, somebody else will.
Somebody else will, yeah.
And this is what happened to most of us. We don't realize it. So with myofascial release, it helps us to go into the belief systems. You don't have to change your beliefs, keep the ones that work for you. But those that no longer are relevant to your life today, you can change them. But you can't change anything until you're aware of it. So going back to channel 5, I call our intelligence channel 5. All of healthcare is based on channel 5, order and control.
The intellect, kind of the left brain.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
The problem is that we don't heal in channel 5. So it's been a blind alley for a lot of us, temporary results, frustration. So what myofascial release does in a very efficient, totally safe, highly effective way, it switches into what I call channel 3. That's your intuitive, instinctive side. That's the healing zone.
Mm-hmm.
Neuroscientists have discovered that the database available to us in channel 3 is in excess of 10 million to 1 of that of our intellect.
The database available to us in our
3.
intuitive side is 10,000 to 1, that which is available to us from our intellectual side.
Exactly. And in fact, it's much more than that. It's so vast they just gave up counting after a while. This is what I call feeling intelligence. It's different than thinking intelligence. It's a different
Uh-huh.
vibrational level.
Uh-huh.
Another word for all of that is wisdom.
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 Mhm.
Each one of us, you and I and everybody, is born with wisdom. But then school kind of beat it out of us.
Mhm.
And when I was very young, as I mentioned, my childhood, finding my way through the forest, I learned to trust my wisdom and my intuition. But then, like everybody, it kind of got beat out of me. Then I had a severe trauma, and that sort of woke me up again. Channel 5, our intellectual side, is in psychological parlance, it's called consensus consciousness. Another word for consensus consciousness is trance. We have been in a trance. And what healing is all about is breaking through the trance and becoming aware again, awareness. Again, it has to do with consciousness. And can you hear me okay?
Yes. Every individual's awareness is going to be unique to that individual, but the pathway is common to all of us. Is that true?
Yes, yes. Yeah.
So the renegade part is that you were schooled in protocols, in left brain thinking, in memorization, in
Right.
kinesiology. But you, when you started practicing, recognized that the things that you were taught in school didn't make sense to you in terms of what you were experiencing as the healing response. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Yes. See,
So,
everything, as you know, everything we learned in school is linear and logical. The problem with that, our mind-body complex is neither linear nor logical. We were taught the role and roadmap to reality. In fact, all of science is based, as you know, on reductionist theory.
yeah, the Newtonian part.
Yes, which
Mm-hmm.
was proven by Max Planck, the father of quantum physics, to be a totally erroneous view of the human being. We were pretty much taught a human being, all the research has been done on dead people. Dead people don't have a consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Dead people are brittle. They have no fluid. Everybody ignored the fascia, the fluid,
Mm-hmm.
the fascia, and consciousness. And that's the model of reality we were all taught.
John, the principles that you teach, I remember when I first had my first course with you in 1989, and the principles that you taught, even then, and predated that time, seemed to precede science. Only after you were teaching many of your unique principles, starting in the 70s, did we start to read science that might point to the hypothesized mechanism of action of how those principles and those who followed your principles, your directions, while treating, seemed to achieve such positive outcomes when other approaches were largely unsuccessful, following the protocols and getting rid of the pain for 2 weeks and then it coming back, and the frustration we felt as physical therapists and not being able to really get at the issues, just putting band-aids on. And for example, I remember when I was first reading about Donald Ingber and mechanotransduction. This is in the 1980s, after I had met you and after I had felt that contact, that soft touch, and that feeling of energy, resonance in your first course, just without any preliminary learning. You taught me how to respond to the cranial rhythm, to that life force, and I felt it. And then I started reading about Donald Ingber and mechanotransduction, and he talked about pressure and elongation stimulating through electrons. Now we've shifting from Newton to quantum through electrons and infrared energy causing a piezoelectric effect, and then the softening of the ground substance, thixotrophy, which is exactly what you were teaching. You talked about melting the ground substance. And I remember how excited I was when I came to you, and you would send me articles and I would send you articles as this science was being discovered and published. It was validating your teaching. What was that like for you?
Well, I didn't need science to teach me. In fact, there's a wonderful quote by Mark Twain. I forget exactly what he said, but it went something like, "It took me years to get over my education." This programming of ours is unbelievable. I'm a very logical person, but I was injured, which brought my intuition back into play. And that was an important.
Talk to us about the injury and what happened in the process of your healing from that injury that got you started on this particular approach that predated
I was
science.
an athlete when I was younger. I played football, I ran track, I threw the shot put, I skied, I drove motorcycles. I got involved in competitive karate, competitive weightlifting. Basically, I love motion, I love competition. And one day I went down to the gym to work out, and I had nobody there to spot me. I was doing squats with somewhere over 300 pounds, but I got to the point where I couldn't get up. I've been a gymnast when I was younger, so I thought I'll just do a back roll to get out of this, forgetting that when you have a 300-pound bar on your hands, it doesn't let go. So I crashed down on the ground with tremendous force, and I herniated my disc at L5, ripped a number of ligaments in the iliac area. And I laid there totally stunned. I couldn't move. And I was numb from the waist down. And before I go any further, one of these principles happened then that I didn't have words for then. It seems we have a survival mechanism. So remind me to come back to talk to you about our survival mechanisms.
Okay.
Very important. Anyway, I was numb from the waist down. The purpose of the survival mechanism is to numb us out to help us get through an ordeal that's just too intense. And in fact, it can save our life. Then as the numbness wore off, the pain began. It was horrible. I couldn't move. In that instant, everything I loved, competition, motion, was taken from me. I laugh about it today, but I had to crawl out of the gym. And from that moment on, my life had changed. I tried every form of therapy known to mankind. Nobody wanted to get better more than I did. Nothing but temporary results. It was so frustrating. I had a friend that was a radiologist, and he invited me to a ski house one weekend. But I couldn't ski, and he saw how much pain I was in. So he encouraged me to go see a friend of his that was an orthopedic surgeon. And he suggested I get a spinal fusion. So I did. And that helped. But I still hurt a lot, and I still couldn't move very well.
So you refused at L5, S1?
Yes. Yeah. So it helped, but not as much as I had hoped for, So out of total desperation, what I would do is lay on my living room floor, and I'd find these areas in my body that hurt so bad or felt so hard, and I'd push into them. I was still very strong. I was trying to bull my way through. But my intuitive voice would say, lighten up some more. Take more time. Fortunately, I listened to it. I started to make this remarkable recovery. And so I started to feel, as I was treating myself with the lighter pressure, sensations all over my body. So it's beyond the origin insertion of muscle. So it hit me, I must be dealing with the fascial system. I've been asked to speak in an osteopathic college and TMJ symposiums. So I had access to the library. So I went to the library to see what they knew about fascia. They had a stack of books on fascia, maybe that thick. On top of the stack of books, there was a pile of dust about that thick. I haven't been touched in decades, Dr. Andrew Still, who was the founder of osteopathy, had some really good ideas on the fascial system. And the form of osteopathic myofascial release is what I now call the old form of myofascial release. We can talk about that in just a little bit too. It's more like brute force ramming into the restriction. And unfortunately, that is a lot of pain for something that just doesn't last very long. So somehow my intuition started to click in, and basically I learned to trust it again, and it guided me. And then I started to use these principles with my patients, and all of a sudden everybody's making this remarkable turnaround in their life where before not much was happening, as much as I wanted it to.
So you were looking for, in your patients, you were looking for the areas that were hard or hurting.
That's
and
right.
you then use this soft touch.
Right.
Sustained release.
Sustained, yes. That's the fine factor is so important, and the proper pressure. So I was sort of guided step by step. It's this beautiful tapestry that's developed over the years. Words came to me, but I had the experience first.
Uh-huh.
I felt on myself, I could trust it,
Uh-huh. And then your staff was guinea pigs too, weren't they?
I didn't hear you.
I said your staff was guinea pigs too. You
Yeah,
started treating your staff, and then they insisted that you start teaching this stuff.
that's right. That's right. Yeah. It turns out that all forms of traditional therapy, mobilization, muscle energy, massage, exercise, on and on and on, it's too quick. There's a number of phenomena that occur that you just touched on a little bit earlier. So with myofascial release, this is an art. It's not a science, really. The science is catching up and describing things. But true myofascial release is an art. When I went to PT school, the first day we learned that physical therapy was an art and a science. From that day on, I never heard the word art again.
Uh-huh.
So, but PT gave me a nice profession. I really enjoyed it for a while, but I realized it wasn't working that well. But anyway, with myofascial release, what I train people to do, first we have to learn to quiet our mind so we can feel properly with our proprioceptive senses. We go into the body slowly always, and then we feel where the restricted area is. The old form of myofascial release is pushing through it. That just sets up mental protection and resistance.
That's that osteopathic myofascial release.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, when you become successful, there's a lot of copycat courses popping up. So everybody's calling it myofascial release.
Yeah.
It's forcing a system that can't be forced.
Uh-huh.
It pays no attention to the emotions that are locked into the system,
Right.
the memories that are there that aren't going to be released when somebody forces somebody.
It's treating fascia like tissue rather than a system.
Teach me what?
I said it's treating fascia like tissue. You're working on the tissue rather than the whole system.
Right. Right, exactly. Yeah. So everybody's fascial strain patterns are different. As PTs and other forms of therapists, we're taught protocols, one size fits all.
Right.
And that has nothing to do with the patient on the table. So the art of myofascial release is to feel their restriction. We have close to 8 billion people in our world today. There's 8 billion different fascial strain patterns. So you feel the restriction. This is totally individualistic care. And then you engage it with gentle but firm and sustained pressure. And eventually, as that occurs, a number of phenomena occur. It takes about 90 to 120 seconds for the collagen to even begin to release. And that's just the beginning. And it takes at least another 3 to 5 minutes for a release on a much deeper level that will last. Somewhere around the 5-minute period, there's a number of phenomena that occur that don't occur with traditional therapy because, as I said, it's too quick. So you mentioned piezoelectricity. So as you engage the barrier, just wait enough time. Remember, the phenomenon of piezoelectricity begins to develop. Piezoelectricity is a Greek word for pressure electricity. The cells are crystalline in nature. It's a well-known fact when you put pressure into a crystal, it generates an electrical flow. In our body, it's a bioelectrical flow. This is then coupled with what you just said, the mechanotransduction. What that means is our mechanical pressure stimulates interleukin 8, which is our body's natural anti-inflammatory. It enhances the piezoelectric effect. And then we move into something called phase transition.
Mm-hmm.
The work of Dr. Gerald Pollack comes in very handy here. He's one of the world's leading experts in fluid dynamics.
Right.
Incredible man.
Yeah.
And he's developed, you and I were brought up to believe there's 3 phases of water: ice, water, and vapor. Well, it turns out there's a 4th phase. And Dr. Pollack has discovered this. So when we move through mechanotransduction, we move into what's called phase transition. On phase transition, that which is solidified in your body, like ice, is transformed into fluid again. Because when we go through trauma, physical or emotional, the fascial system begins to become more and more viscous, to the point where it becomes almost like crushing pressure on pain-sensitive nerves and blood vessels, joints. It can generate tensile strengths of up to close to 2,000 pounds per square inch. And none of this shows up in any of the standard testing that's being done. Very few physicians or therapists were trained to even recognize it and understand its importance. So during phase transition, we go into therapeutic chaos. Now that's another bad word in healthcare. It's all about order. This has to do with systems theory, which states we can only grow and heal in a chaotic situation. Because we have a mind, it always reorganizes at a higher level. So this sort of roller coaster ride we take, it's incredible. And eventually we move into what's called resonance. When you and I touch another human being, our vibratory rates are quite different than another human being. But as long as we're not forcing the system, what begins to occur is the energy now that had become so viscous and solidified starts to rehydrate. And now this crushing pressure starts to lessen over pain-sensitive structures. And that's when authentic healing commences.
Yeah, you said that it's dammed up because it's a flow of information through the fascia, the living, vibrating crystal web. And it's a flow of information, or you call it the mind is flowing, but these restrictions are like dams that block information so that the cells can't talk to one another and homeostasis is interrupted.
Exactly. You sound like you know what you're talking about.
I've been listening to you. And also some other scientists who seem to know what they're talking about too, really confirming your work. I remember how excited I was when Paul Stanley spoke in Vancouver about sustaining the compression and getting the interleukin effect. And Richard Hardy and I picked up on that right away, and you did too. We sent it to you and you said, yes, this is exactly what we're talking about. Healing can't happen quickly. It happens over time. And we were taught very quick fixes.
Right.
And of course, the pharmaceutical industry has really incorporated that quick fix idea. Everybody wants a quick fix and wants to be fixed.
That's right. Yeah.
But John, you talk about the healing endeavor as being a relationship between the therapist and the patient. And that one of the most important principles that you ask us to believe is if you know what you're going to do before you go in the room, you don't know what you're doing.
Right. Exactly. So protocols, we're all taught to follow the protocols.
Yeah.
And do the person on the table. We'll talk about centering in just a little bit because I teach all the therapists and physicians I train to learn how to center themselves. So that when you touch another person, you go in like a curious cat. Now you can start with symptoms, that's obvious to everybody, but you start to read the body. You analyze tissue texture. Is it hard, or tender? Does it move? It's a glide system. If you look at Dr. Gambarteau's work, which I know you're very familiar with, all his information shows you it's a glide system.
Glide system.
But when that viscosity of the ground substance gets to a point where the tissue can't glide anymore, that's what we call restrictions. You feel that where it stops,
Right.
And then the feeling of a release is kind of like butter melting or taffy stretching. You don't slide on the surface, that's massage, but you then take the slack out again until you hit another restriction. Most of us have multiple barriers or restrictions. So the time factor, the proper pressure, and then the therapist being centered is key. If the therapist isn't centered, and most aren't, they're coming from the channel 5 intellectual side, the patient's subconscious picks that up and they go into protection as much as as much as the therapist wants to help them.
And it's important for patients to be open and feel safe. Exactly. And that's that resonance. And you and I remember talked at one point where 60 to 90 seconds, your hands are placed, and then all of a sudden you start to feel that dipping. It's like the body invites you to dip down into it. It's very subtle, but you dip down into it. And you said, I feel like that's when resonance is established, that energetic link between the energy of the therapist and the patient. And that's when the real release begins to happen.
That's exactly correct. Yeah. So that some schools teach 5 grams of pressure or heavy pressure. And that the art of it is, as you said, you feel the mind. And the mind is very dynamic. And as you quiet yourself down, you can feel this. Anybody can learn this. But Channel 5 is so busy talking and thinking, it completely misses all the information it's bombarding. So like you're saying, that when you're releasing somebody, it's like a magnet pulling you in. At times it pushes you away. You sort of ride the wave with them, but continue to engage the barrier for a sufficient amount of time.
Right. I love the image of the curious cat. To let go of the outcome and just be present. That was a gift that you gave me, that you give all of us, but I certainly picked up on it when I was doing my skill enhancement with you, when I was treating patients with you for a week. And until that point, I'd been 20 years as a clinician, a practicing physical therapist, going by the protocols and reading the research and doing what the research told me. And then all of a sudden I was given this permission to do something very different that felt right, but was very intellectually threatening to me. And you and I talked about this. Out on a rock in Oak Creek one day in 1993. And you encouraged me to not be afraid, because to live my life worried about what other people were going to think of me was not to live a life at all. And you encouraged me to start writing down these ideas that I had. And I knew that I had to somehow know more about quantum theory. I hadn't put it together yet, that what you were doing was shifting us, not forgetting Newton altogether, but expanding our understanding of Newton into quantum, and reflecting on the idea of letting the energy do the work rather than force.
Right. You can't separate quantum from Newtonian physics. We tried to do that. I mean, traditionally, it can't happen,
Yeah, they're all, it depends on what you're looking at as to what's predominant.
That's right. Yeah.
Both are working at the same time.
Yeah.
So, this recent fall, last October, an attack on your body almost took your life one more time. You've had a couple of times where you were bitten by a brown recluse spider and also scorpion, and you almost lost your life with that.
Yeah.
And now once more with this. And of course, your trauma as a young man was a life-threatening kind of trauma. You said you've experienced near death more than once in your lifetime. From your heart, what wisdom have you been able to take from the near-death experiences that you've had?
Well, as you said, bugs like me.
Bugs like you.
The brown recluse spider did almost kill me. Creates this horrible bullseye in your leg. It's a long. I'll get into the details if you want, but just to skim over it now. I became almost delirious. The Poison Control Center was called by my son Brian, and they said there's nothing you can do about it. Your father will probably die. There's no antidote. And they said if you have trouble breathing, come into the emergency room. We'll try to help you. But that was a very positive message. But I think my ability to have access to tremendous energy, it saved my life. But I was really out of it for a couple of days, shaking violently and horrible pain and on and on and on. But I had patients to come in to see me from all over the world that Monday. I just couldn't let them down. So somehow I could hardly stand up. I took a shower. I was holding onto the walls. I went in and I told my staff, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. I said, but just let them know I've been injured and, I'll do the best I can. I could barely sit, so I'm sitting on a chair doing some technique sitting. And my intuition said, pull your energy back to your spine. So I did that. Then it said, pull your energy to the back of your spine. When I did that, this tremendous force went through me. And the patients flew off the table from the energetic charge they were getting. At the end of the day, they all said, that's the best treatment I ever had. So I teach a lot of that in centering and with the different seminars. There is an energy. See, healthcare doesn't want to talk about energy either,
Right. That's quantum.
Yeah. And I give a lot of silly examples in the seminars, but just to make a point, imagine you have a toaster that isn't warming the bread. Well, massage therapists are rubbing the cover. PTs and chiropractors are in there messing around with the joints, Everyone wants to know what your mother had to do with it. And what I'm saying is, have you thought about plugging
the toaster in?
See, this is what myofascial gets to the very core of your existence. There's an energy to it. That's the essence that we talk about, luminescent mist that I read about in this book so many years ago, So as you tap into that, it not only makes you a more effective therapist or human being or healthier, but also helps you to save your life. It's what it did for me. And when I was in the hospital after this recent fall, my kidneys had shut down. I was on dialysis for a couple of months. Unfortunately, the physicians that were taking care of me in the dialysis unit were shocked because they said, you're the second person we've ever had in all the years we've been treating people that came off of dialysis. So wow. I think MFR saved my kidneys and its function, and it saved my life. Because I went totally out when I was getting dialysis one day, and I just remember this voice saying, John, are you there? Are you there? Can you hear me? It's like far, far away.
Mm-hmm.
I've struggled to come back. It took quite a while for me to come back and get really fully conscious again.
So you were out of your body?
Oh, yeah.
Were you connected to any vision, or do you remember anything about it?
I've been out of my body for so long. I teach people to go out of their body, so that the key is to be out of your body and in your body at all times. Then you're fully present, fully clear, and fully powerful, and in touch with your wisdom. The first month after that happened, I was mentally out there. It was really bizarre. And so I'm back now 95% mentally. I tell the class when I'm doing a class right now that I might forget a word once in a while, but I'll just make it up and we'll flow by it,
There's nothing new about that.
But what it did, all these near-death experiences, was really reinforce the life principles with myofascial I've been teaching for decades now. Just made them stronger. I'm having more clarity than ever, and still struggling physically. It's really hard work, but I'm getting there. Just frustrating.
So you're healing. Mm-hmm. before we go, can you talk to us a little bit about unwinding? There's a lot of controversy right now about the concept of unwinding, and there is what I call a kind of a movement in what's called somatic movement, a kind of guided movement where a therapist suggests that you move in certain ways, that kind of came out of self-care, really, over Zoom, because we couldn't touch and be with people. And so it's I think the concept of unwinding that you teach has been distorted somewhat. It's not the way I recognize the inner experience. So could you tell us a little bit about how you teach about unwinding, what it is, and how it's meant to be a healing process?
I think unwinding is a natural phenomenon that started eons ago. And in our society, whether we realize it or not, we were told to never let go of control, as if it was some form of a bad, bad thing. The only time most of us ever let go of control is when we're so exhausted we finally fall asleep. And you go into the dream state. That's unwinding. There's nothing weird about it. You do it every night. Because your body is educating itself. It's releasing things. You flush around, you dream, you drool, you cry. The problem is there's something I call positions in space of past trauma. I'll get back to that in a moment. So the body is self-correcting through the subconscious. What you just mentioned about how they move and tell you how to move, that's conscious motion. That's voluntary motion. That's channel 5.
Right.
It's good. But again, healing occurs not in channel 5, not being moved by somebody, or you're consciously moving. It's when you open up, you learn to quiet yourself down, and this beautiful subconscious motion begins to occur. Your body starts to move spontaneously. It comes back to what I've discovered is there's something called state-dependent memory, learning, and behavior from psychological parlance. Well, I found that has a missing link too, and the missing link is a position in space. When you think about it, when we're traumatized, we're in a position in space. Well, the examples I give is, say you're walking across the street and you hear a car coming at you. You turn toward the car and you brace against it. At that moment of position in space, your energy leaves your body. This comes back to the survival mechanism. Let me give you that. You get hit in this position. Your body numbs out and leaves. That's what happened to me in the weightlifting accident. In emotion, I fall to the ground. There's another position in space of past trauma. Then the damn car runs over me. There's a big. So these somehow are embedded in our energy field. And so with unwinding, it's all about trust. This is why it's so important that therapists be centered. If the patient feels trust enough to take control of it, they start to spontaneously move. We're meant to do that. And somehow your subconscious knows exactly what you need. It's incredible. So as it moves us into these positions in space, we hit something called a still point. It's like suspended animation. They're moving and all of a sudden everything stops. During that position in space, your body may tremor. The trapped energy that got locked into you from the trauma starts to move through you and shake you a bit. Emotions may come up. All sorts of memories may come flooding forth that were not available to your conscious mind. There's other possibility where you get into what I call the freeze response. Total tension, the deer in the headlight kind of look. We have two basic ways of dealing with pain, trauma in our life. You either leave your body, still point, or you go into total tension, the deer in the headlight kind of total contraction and fear. You get locked into that state. Of the many things that happen to you at that moment of trauma, your sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system then is kicked in, and you're locked into one state or the other. It's the most unhealthy thing in the world. You're like the person that drank 10 cups of coffee. You can't sit still. You can't stop talking. You're agitated. You're hurting. You're not sleeping well. Or the opposite end of the spectrum.
No
energy at all. So what myofascial release does, as you go through this process, somehow our mind-body resets itself. And as you said, moves back into homeostasis. Now you have adaptability again and can respond to the moment the way you're meant to. Makes all the difference in the world. So this
The
has been
consciousness, the healing consciousness can flow through again,
exactly.
where we kept it trapped in that fear response, that reactive response. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
So state-dependent memory learning behavior and positional dependent memory learning behavior, it creates what was called a flashback experience. You've all had this experience. Let's say you're walking down the street and you pass a bakery. You smell cookies being baked. And all the memories of your mother baking of chocolate chip cookies, the taste of the cookie comes through instantaneously.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're sitting in a car, the light and your radio's on, and all of a sudden your song comes on. Now that's good or bad. All of a sudden, all those memories, all those emotions come flooding through you.
Yeah.
So that's tissue memory. That's what comes up with it. It's trapped in there, but it's no longer available to the conscious mind. So going into this leads us into what I call our survival mechanism. You and I, as a human being, and every animal in the universe has this survival mechanism. But again, because it has to do with your mind, it's been completely ignored in healthcare. I mean, how you can ignore the mind is mind-boggling to me. I've looked at the story for a long time too. But so when things get too intense for us, too painful or too scary, somehow this energy system of ours leaves our body to some degree. Like with my weightlifting accident, it numbs you out to help you get through the ordeal, and or it saves your life. Pretty important stuff. But what I've seen is that nature wants us to learn from our experiences. So this is a fragmented learning. This then turns into what I call the broken record effect. So if you're hit by a car, and it's a fragmented experience, on the subconscious level, that car's hitting you and hitting you and hitting you like a broken record, day and night. So internally, you're bracing against this pain or fear all night long, all day long. And that constant state of inner tension creates solidification of the ground substance of the fascia and turns into massive problems health-wise for us. And something called dis-ease. If you open up that word, dis-ease, lack of ease,
Mm-hmm.
what are we talking about? The mind gets blocked. It can't go down and to the cellular level so they can function the way they're designed to. So it's about time we start to pay attention to that stuff.
What are you proudest of in your life?
That's a good question. I guess that I've been able to learn from my pain and then be able to transfer that information to my patients and to other therapists and physicians. It's grown so exponentially. I've fortunately been able to train over 100,000 therapists and physicians now. And I think my fascia release is probably being used on millions of people a day, not a day, but maybe a month. And it's spreading like wildfire. It's really the healthcare of the future. We will always need good doctors. We always need medication at times. Unless you've had horrible, crushing trauma, life-threatening trauma, the thing you need is myofascial release as quickly as possible. And I think it really is going to be something that's to develop into that. So I hope that's where we go. Well, I'm teaching a healing seminar right now. This is for people with no background at all in therapy or medicine.
The healing seminar.
Healing seminar.
Mm-hmm.
Also for therapists and physicians. We have 3 or 4 physicians in the group right now. They're doing great. You know, physicians are really opening up to this also. But the results are obvious to everybody. You don't have to convince anybody of myofascial release when it's done properly. It speaks for itself. The patient look at you in awe afterwards and say, that was what I've been waiting for my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
Very instinctive, it's very intuitive.
And some of the distortions that I see of your work is that they don't hold long enough at the barrier. They feel something happening in 90 seconds and say, oh boy, I'm getting really good at this.
Yeah. Well, see, traditional therapy is what I call fool's gold. So when you don't hold long enough, or you use too much pressure, that kind of stuff, and we do a little of that, that's okay, but you don't need that much. Where the pressures are too light, you never engage the barrier properly.
Right, the soft
And
tissue
most of them,
response.
nobody's
Right.
spending enough time, like I said, sustained pressure,
Mm-hmm.
so that the results just don't last, you know.
That's what's unique about your approach. And Is there anything else that you wish that I would have asked that I didn't ask?
No,
Asked if there was anything you'd like her to ask you.
I did hear her. Thank
Are you getting coached from the peanut gallery?
Yeah, Tana's helping me. You've been very thorough. You always are. I'm so glad I met you. You've inspired so many people.
Wow. Right back at you, John. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. I really appreciate your showing up. Let me share my screen